very welcome to today's panel discussion, which is going to look at how ESG is impacting on venture capital. My name is Fitzell. I'm a partner in Deloitte's Mergers and Acquisitions unit based here in Dublin. With me today, we have three very interesting speakers. We've got Denise Xifara. Denise is a partner in GMG Ventures and a co-founder of Venture ESG, which we're going to hear more about in a short time. We've got Hannah Leach, who is a partner at Houghton Street Ventures and also a co-founder of Venture ESG. And last but no means least, we have Colin Hanna, who is a partner of Balderton, and in addition to his investing job, is responsible for the firm's Sustainable Future Goals initiatives. So hi guys, and you're very welcome also.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm great to be here.
We might kick off, guys, with just a very general question around how you've seen ESG develop and what have the drivers been from a venture capital perspective, and maybe how those have changed over the last number of years. Hannah, would you mind leading us out on that one?
Sure. So I'm fairly new to the VC game. I'm a partner at, as you said, Houghton Street Ventures. We're a new London-based venture firm, and we started thinking about ESG about 18 months ago, which is not that long ago. And when we started kind of looking into what other venture funds were doing at this point, we realized that there were very few out there that were really thinking about and working on ESG. So I'd say, generally speaking, the venture industry it's very, 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 very nascent when it comes to ESG and how developed all of our internal practices are.
Okay, and Denise, from your perspective, what have you seen? Any big drivers or any? We've seen obviously ESG in other areas, maybe private equity, capital markets. What's causing venture capital now really to start looking at ESG? And again, has this changed from your perspective over the last number of years?
Yeah, undeniably it's changed. I think the appetite, the interest and the focus on ESG has certainly increased. Perhaps it's even accelerated, one might say, over the last year or so. If I were to think of the drivers, I mean, I guess, from a VC's perspective, there's certainly more interest, oftentimes from founders. Then there's the market, and then of course there's our own investors, all of which collectively I think are more carefully looking at ESG. On the one hand, there's much more awareness around ESG. I think all of those various stakeholders understand what that is and why it matters. There's more regulatory push. There's been more scandals. It's important for consumers much more, than ever before. So that's one, more awareness, but secondly, also more understanding, why it matters and how it can be helpful. And then finally, I think, individual people are also more passionate about it. So founders are more passionate about it. I think we as investors can often be more passionate about it. And so there's that kind of human element, and it's all really come together, I guess, at the moment in a bit of the kind of bigger push, I suppose.
Sure. And then lastly, Colin, and maybe if you could touch on at the same time how Balderton are looking at this with your Sustainable Future Goals framework.
Yeah, Jan, I think firstly, venture is paying more attention to ESG, I think, because people are realizing that venture capital is kind of presenting a larger role in our economy, in our society, and venture-backed companies are starting to acquire more and more importance, particularly here in Europe, than they have historically. What comes with that has been, I think, renewed interest from institutional investors and people who are used to having a degree of oversight over their private equity funds or large asset managers, and they want to apply that same degree of oversight to early stage venture managers. I think this is both positive and negative, actually. I think early stage venture has always been a little bit more art than science, and a lot of these large asset managers and private equity funds are engaging in ESG as a more sort of check the box exercise to make sure that they're not engaging in risky activity. Early stage venture, I think, represents a real opportunity to align investment with impact, right? And not just for quote unquote impact funds, but actually because you're meeting with individuals, founders, who are in the very early stages of their journey are trying to shape the world around a particular wedge, which is their product or their service or their company, right? And so I think what's a really powerful potential here is marrying sort of the requirements of ESG with this kind of the early stage, the steel has yet to really set in early stage venture, and you can really start to maybe shape companies that are really at their core driven by some idea of impact or how they want the world to change. And we've all touched on the generational change that's afoot, the urgency of the climate action. And so I think all these things are coming together right now, and Hannah and Denise have really captured the zeitgeist with the community that they've created around it, and really are trying to do a good job of leading the charge. At Balderton, we've been around 21 years in venture in Europe. And historically we've made investments that have had impact, but never until about 2 years ago, when we were I was sitting with our managing partner and operating partner, a few members of our investment team, and we were really realizing that it was time for us to kind of be a little bit more vocal about how we wanted to see the world and how we wanted to respond to questions we were getting from junior members of our investment team and our LPs about how are we going to be part of this change? And at Balderton, what we decided to do, and I won't go into too much detail here, but was to take the UN Sustainable Development Goals and to really read them critically as a European venture capital firm and say what are relevant for us and what might not be, and what's in scope. And for us, that was a list of 10 sustainable future goals that we've put out there for everybody as a framework for ourselves and for our portfolio companies.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks for that, guys. You touched on, I think a couple of you touched on an interesting feature from my perspective in terms of how ESG is impacting at the funds level. And I know Hannah and Denise, Venture ESG is looking at that area. So maybe could one of you or both of you pick up around that? What is Venture ESG? Why did you set it up? And why you guys are really seeing that ESG impact at the funds level? What are you trying to help there?
Denise.
You can go, Hannah.
So we really Venture ESG as a community and as an initiative has grown really organically over the last kind of 9 months. We started it both as GMG Ventures and Houghton Street Ventures to solve our own personal problem of how we were integrating ESG and looking to adapt all of the existing frameworks that existed in public markets and late stage private markets that we felt weren't really relevant to the types of challenges that early stage companies faced and the considerations that you needed to think through when you were investing or supporting your portfolio companies. So we built out a more venture startup specific approach and framework, and in doing that realized that other funds were starting to think about doing the same. So what we've built is a community that really exists to promote ESG and venture and provide funds with the knowledge, the resources, the tools and the insight to be able to kind of implement more robust practices, both internally in terms of the way they operate as funds, but also the way they kind of do deals and support companies over the course of their lifetime.
And Denise, are you seeing that sort of good buy-in in terms of the sharing of information, the sharing of ideas across funds? Are funds really buying into that?
100%. I mean, we've grown so rapidly from a community perspective. In the last few months that we've been active, I think more and more funds are acknowledging really the value that they can derive really by participating. And I think it's a testament, to the appetite and the need that there's a lot of community sharing. So it's very much, our community is very much a place where people are talking not only about their challenges, but also stuff that they're seeing, stuff that they're doing that other funds can learn from, and really very collaboratively kind of discussing, what works well, what doesn't work well, and what also remains a challenge that we sort of all want to address collectively. So absolutely, it's been working really well, and I think there's also a really strong signal that there's demand for more. It's one thing to be sharing knowledge and to be having that discussion, and then it's a whole other thing to actually have tangible tools and resources that you're out there using in practice, that you're implementing, and then that you're also reporting on. And I guess that's kind of what we want to tackle next.
Yeah, I think that last bit that you mentioned, I think, is interesting too. That ability to measure, to set standards. What should you be looking at, right? So, Colin, that's going back to your sustainable future goals. Are you seeing funds having difficulty in incorporating ESG practices because it's been traditionally hard to measure these things? What should we be measuring? How should we be measuring them? Or what do you feel around those difficulties that VCs are facing?
So I think there are a plethora of issues, right? I think a fundamental issue I always go to is for example, carbon accounting versus financial accounting, right? I mean, we have a system that we've perfected now over hundreds of years of how to count money, and people who actually go to school, for years and years just to learn that system and to learn that language, accounting, to be able to count money appropriately across different currencies, across different countries. We have nothing of the like when it comes to carbon accounting. Not everybody can agree, exactly how you should count it, whether one offset is the same as the other. You have all sorts of independent certifiers, and so, we have to coalesce around certain standards and certain definitions that everybody feels are universal before this can be really effective. Compounded at the early stage VC level is the fact that, early stage companies are not publicly listed companies with the same sort of resource, with the same sort of ability to dedicate overhead cost, to marketing and to saying the right things and counting the right things to be able to publish a shiny report that they can give to their shareholders, right? That is not what early stage founders and companies typically have time to do. So, actually just before this, we came back from a portfolio workshop on carbon offsetting, which we hosted for just within our portfolio and with a young company in London called Supercritical, which is just about, really practically, how should we go about measuring and offsetting some basic emissions for an early stage startup? And you have companies there that are doing well in their journeys. They now have a little bit of resource and they want to dedicate time and they want to get this right. But it's never at the really, really top of the list. And I think so. It's the job of communities like the ones Hannah and Denise have started. It's the job of funds like ourselves to remind, I think, as investors and as board members that this is important. It's important to get this right early on. It's going to be easier to do it early on in your journey rather than trying to sort of shoehorn it in later when you're a large company. And so I think, if we're setting that tone and collectively trying to find the right tools and solutions and standards and definitions, we're going to keep things moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Can I just add, can I just add to that? Because I completely agree with what Colin's just said. And I guess just on this last point around demonstrating that that's important, one fundamental gap an issue right now is, lack of data. So it's very hard to benchmark. It's very hard to sort of monitor progress or sort of know what you're aiming for and kind of really demonstrating quantitatively the benefit of doing ESG the right way comprehensively, which is also, I guess, something that we're trying to change by kind of bringing people together and having these standards and kind of having some common strategy around this.
I would.
And even going on from there, Hannah, in terms of when you are looking at companies to invest into, how do you go about target companies' ESG standing? Is it an area of diligence for you guys, or talk us through maybe how you would evaluate that in your investee companies?
Is that for me? Sorry,
Hannah. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Stop it. I'm just not sure I'm the best person because we're not deploying capital. We've built a process, but we're not actively investing. So I feel like that question might be best answered by Colin or Denise, who are, whose funds are very active. Yeah, sure. So guys, I don't know whether you have a perspective on it. How do you look at a company's ESG standing? You mentioned, Colin, some companies see it as a bit of a tick the box exercise. Clearly isn't. So how do you evaluate how far along the ESG road those companies may or may not be?
Yeah, I think on the tick the box exercise, I think what I was alluding to, just to clarify, is large asset managers and large, private equity funds that have, very, very large portfolio companies and perhaps, billions to trillions in assets under management for whom, the actual interpersonal relationships are hard to get by. So you have to go by these reporting standards. You have to get to that level of abstraction when you're dealing with that quantity. We're at the early stage. To answer the question, I think you assess it by sitting across the table from an individual, asking them these questions, talking through what it is they want to achieve, and gauging their authenticity, gauging the degree to which they take these topics seriously and they care about them. And then subsequently to that, once you've made an investment, it's when you're sitting in the boardroom at the in these early stages, are these topics coming up on the agenda? Are they something that you're dedicating time to? And if they're not, you have to hustle hard to push it onto the agenda, to dedicate time to it. And that, I think, you can assess at the early stage. It becomes a part of, for us, it's now an agenda item that we discuss when we discuss our new deals, when we have teams coming to present to our investment committee. how do they fit against the framework that we've created for ourselves? And look, it's not the only consideration. Together with the scale of the market, the caliber of the team, what they've done in the past, their potential to earn profits down the line. But if they're mapping against our framework in a bad way, or there's really red flags, we have to address those issues now. And so, I think you just look at a company holistically. You don't know what it's necessarily going to be in 8 or 10 years. That's the other thing about early stage ventures. You're investing in something that doesn't necessarily exist yet. So you have to do the best you can with the information you have. And mostly, I think that's based on the caliber of the people and the conversations you're having at those early stages.
Sure. And Denise, would you agree? Do you see your portfolio CEOs coming to you looking for advice around the ESG area yet? Or are they still thinking that maybe that's tomorrow's problem and I've enough else on my plate?
No, I mean, they're certainly acknowledging the importance of ESG. I think when we meet them, but also, after the investment, it's a topic that we very often engage on. I guess just to your earlier question, I mean, ESG is very much interwoven, I think, in everything a VC does anyway for commercial purposes. Obviously, oftentimes there might be standalone questions, and oftentimes, certain funds might have dedicated teams. But at the end of the day, ESG is just part of, how a company operates, and as an investor, you want a company to operate well. So if you think about, financial considerations, whether unit economics are scalable, or rely to some kind of relaxation of employment laws, is relevant for whether a company is bound to do well, especially as it grows and aims to become a unicorn. If you think about product scalability, whether it's been designed humanely and responsibly, again, might very much influence its defensibility and ability to grow. At the end of the day, if you're an early stage investor, you're investing in people, you're investing in a team. You want the working environment and the culture in your startup to be very healthy and vibrant and inclusive, in order for hiring to work, in order for you to have, really high retention, et cetera, et cetera. And so on and so forth. And ESG is obviously really broad in terms of the various domains. So, so it's an absolute priority, I think, more and more for investors, but also for founders that kind of understand that you need to find the balance across all of those various questions and get the recipe right if you want to become very successful. And so I think more founders, more often than not now, definitely see that.
Okay, interesting. Hannah, maybe looking then from the limited partners perspective in terms of funds when they're going out to raise funding, are you seeing LPs pushing you towards a more ESG focused way of investing? Is there real commitment coming from the top, let's say?
So I think there definitely is LP pressure. Like LPs are adding kind of ESG questions into their DDQs, but we often find that they don't necessarily have a VC specific ESG process. The ESG questions that they're asking are the same across all of their asset classes. And depending on which LPs you talk to and which parts of the world and what type of LPs they are, you'll find that those questions and those DDQs and the issues they look at differ widely. So we're actually working also with a bunch of LPs to try and kind of see if we can align the questions that they're asking with the things that we think are really valuable from a venture perspective, and come up with a little bit of consensus around the questions that are being asked of funds and their portfolio companies.
Interesting. Is that part of your ESG Ventures initiative?
Yes.
Yeah. Colin, Denise, any perspectives around that from an LP perspective?
I mean, from our experience, I guess LPs, I mean, it's ESG is becoming more and more important, as part of the kind of wider trend. If they have, I suppose, concerns, it will be similar to the sorts of concerns VCs have when they're trying to do ESG, which is how do you do it right? How do you avoid too much complexity? How do you do it in a way that's practical and that works for your portfolios? And so it's more about the implementation, because there isn't sort of a common way of doing it yet, which is obviously what we're trying to achieve. And because, there isn't a standard and we don't have all the data, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of, the execution, there's question marks. We're trying to address these, but in terms of its importance and kind of the need to do it, I think more often than not, there's very strong alignment.
Yeah. Colin, you'd agree?
I certainly would agree. I think what are we talking about here? I think we're talking about LPs want their capital to be flowing to companies that are going to be like responsible citizens of the global community, that are going to be able to often take care of the planet that we're all living on, treat their employers and their customers fairly, that are not going to blow up in the news for various scandals associated with perhaps ethics or corporate governance. And us as investors, we want the same thing. I think the tension is always, in a high pressure situation of, how to create value very rapidly, which is what venture capital often does. What are the trade-offs that individuals are willing to make? And it's about partnering with the right individuals who see those trade-offs and often, find the path that actually, enables them to actually find a way to chart that journey in a way that, their entire stakeholders are feeling proud about what they're a part of.
Interesting. Okay. Maybe just to wrap up, one final question around what have you seen companies enact in terms of ESG approaches? Anything novel or interesting, or as you say, you're dealing with some pretty early stage companies. Have you been surprised by any of the initiatives you've seen these companies take at this stage? A broad question for all of you. So Denise, do you want to take that first?
Yes, I mean, I think obviously one of the most important things is to be on the front foot about this as early as possible and really have ESG considerations be part of the team's DNA from the very beginning. ESG isn't something that you kind of learn along the way, I suppose, even though you might become a bit better at governance. And so, we've often been very impressed with founders that have been really thoughtful, in particular around responsible product, and sometimes, you want to hack a product together very quickly because you're trying to sort of get to market very quickly. But actually, very often nowadays, we're seeing founders that are kind of spending the time to put more checks and balances in place, and perhaps to overinvest in a tech team that's a bit more mature around responsible product than they might otherwise have been. And that's particularly, I suppose, relevant because we do media tech. So it's particularly relevant, I suppose, to our thesis. So that's definitely one thing that we're seeing is really starting early, and also on the product side, not just in terms of recruitment, which is what you'd more typically see. And then the other I guess area that really stands out is around team culture and how important it is to be thoughtful about this early on, but also in a unique way. So it's not so much about seeing what another company is doing and copying that, but really being very thoughtful about your values and the personality of the company and the personality of the team, and how early on you whether it's types of team meetings or socials or ways of working together, you want to find that unique recipe that kind of works for you, and that then allows you to also grow, as hiring kind of rapidly changes. So I guess I'd pick out those two areas.
Cool. Hannah, I appreciate your early days in terms of your investing activities, but anything around that, even in terms of companies you've come across before? Interesting novel areas they're focusing on?
I think one kind of important point is that there's really a lack of kind of strong case studies on the company level, or at least people haven't surfaced those yet. And that's what we want to build out. We want to be able to say, look at this company at seed stage operating in fintech space, and this is how they've really effectively built a diverse and inclusive culture. So those are kind of what we want to pull out from the community to show to all of our portfolio companies as examples of best practice. I think the two areas where we've made the most progress on the company level is on DEI. So how, to Denise's point, how companies can build more diverse and inclusive cultures, and that applies kind of hiring and kind of diversity of product teams and a lot else, and also on carbon accounting and managing and tracking your environmental footprint. And I think that's because there's just so much being spoken and about it. There's communities being built around that, and loads of resources out there for companies to use.
Yeah, I think that case study point you mentioned is really interesting one, and probably not surprising given the fact that it's still in its infancy, right? ESG in terms of venture capital, we need those poster children to be created. Colin, any last thoughts around that? Again, same question. Any new novel things that you've seen your companies do, or maybe potential investee companies do?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I get most motivated by have been, in particular in the last 6, 12, 18 months, there's a number of companies who are looking at actually, this is a meta comment, but who are looking at all these companies who are trying to get this right and realizing that the tools aren't there, the transparency isn't there, the data sets don't exist, and who are actually, they're picking up, quitting their jobs at their funds or quitting their jobs at their previous employer and saying, I'm going to go and build this, right? I'm going to go and set this up. This doesn't exist yet. I'm going to go and set this up. So if you look at, I think in the future, the investing at Balderton, of funds like ourselves, peers, incubating programs like YC, the proportion of them who are really trying to practically attack these sets of problems that we've all articulated in this panel with real products and services, that makes me optimistic about the future.
Cool. Well, listen, guys, we might leave it there for today. Just a big thank you again, Hannah, Denise, Colin, for your input. I found it really interesting. It was lovely chatting with you, and we'll speak again soon, hopefully.
Thanks very much.